Intro. The words she fears. Every woman at some point in her life fears hearing certain words from a man. They are not words of anger, not words of rejection, but words that cut through the illusion she once believed in, the illusion that love, once spoken, will always remain the same. In every relationship, there comes a moment when a woman realizes that affection alone does not guarantee understanding. It's the moment when silence begins to mean more than sentences. When the eyes that once sought her now look away, not with hatred but with distance. And then softly he says it. I don't feel the same anymore. Those words, simple, cruel in their honesty, liberating in their truth. And yet, behind that simple phrase hides a deeper question, one that Michael Sandel might ask. What makes love moral? Is it the promise we make when we feel it, or the courage to tell the truth when we no longer do? For many women, it's not the loss of love that hurts most. It's the collapse of meaning. The sudden awareness that the story she was building, the future she was imagining, was shared by only one mind, not two. And in that moment, everything she believed about herself, about him, about the us they formed, begins to unravel. Philosophy at its core is not about answers. It's about the courage to face the truth. And this truth is one every woman eventually confronts. That love is not a promise sealed by emotion, but a mirror that reflects who we are and who we fear to become when the feeling fades. Michael Sandel often speaks about moral limits, the boundaries of what money, status, or emotion can justify. In the same way, there are moral limits in love. We cannot buy it. We cannot command it. And once the moral center collapses, once respect and honesty are gone, even the deepest affection becomes hollow. So, what are these words every woman fears? They are not always, I don't love you. Sometimes, they sound like, I need space. I've changed. You deserve better. Or the most silent version of all, nothing, when he simply stops trying. The philosophy of emotional honesty. Michael Sandel teaches that moral philosophy is not about abstract ideals, but about the choices we make in real life, in love, in friendship, in justice. He would ask, is it right to tell the truth even when that truth breaks a heart? And the answer, though painful, is yes. For women, emotional truth often arrives too late. They sense the change long before it's spoken. The messages slow down. The eyes drift away. The laughter that once echoed now fades into politeness. Yet they hold on, not because they are blind, but because they hope honesty might return if they love harder. But honesty is not resurrected by effort. It's born from courage, and men, too, often fear their own honesty, because it exposes their weakness, their guilt, their inability to fulfill what they once promised. Here lies the paradox. The very words women fear, I don't love you anymore, are also the words that set them free. They end the illusion. They return her to herself. They force her to rebuild meaning, not from someone else's affection, but from her own resilience. Philosophically, this is a moment of moral clarity. Sandel might say that our emotional lives are bound by justice, not legal justice, but inner justice, the fairness we owe to ourselves and to others. When a man speaks truth, no matter how painful, he restores that moral balance. And when a woman accepts that truth without bitterness, she embodies the very essence of Stoic strength. Because Stoicism is not cold detachment, it's disciplined acceptance. It's the art of saying, this hurts, but I will not let it define me. Every woman who has survived heartbreak has practiced philosophy. without knowing it. Every tear was an argument. Every sleepless night was a debate between emotion and reason. Sandel reminds us that justice begins with seeing others as moral equals.
In love, that means recognizing that both hearts are free.
No one is bound by obligation to feel forever, and yet, it is the way we leave, not just that we leave, that reveals our character. So when a man speaks those feared words, the question is not, why did he stop loving her? But did he honor her dignity in how he left? Because love in its highest form is not about permanence, and it's about integrity. The mirror of fear. Every woman's fear is a reflection of her depth. She fears not because she is weak, but because she has dared to attach her soul to another human being. And that courage, to trust, to believe, to build, is what makes the fall so devastating. Fear in love is not irrational. It's moral. It's the recognition that what's at stake is not just affection, but identity. When a man withdraws, she begins to question, was I not enough? Did I misread everything? Did I love too deeply? But the philosopher would ask, should love ever be measured in enough? If love is a transaction of worth, then it loses its moral power. Sandel warns us about the danger of turning relationships into markets of validation, where love becomes a currency and worth depends on return. Real love is not an exchange. It's a gift. And fear arises when we forget that truth. The words women fear are not deadly because they end love, but because they expose dependency. They reveal how much of herself she gave away, how much meaning she built around someone who was never meant to be her foundation. It's not the man she mourns, then it's the version of herself she lost while loving him. Philosophy teaches detachment not from people, but from illusion. And the greatest illusion in modern relationships is that love should always make us happy. In truth, love makes us human, vulnerable, flawed, and awake. When he says those words, when he pulls away, she faces the mirror for the first time. And what she sees is not rejection, but revelation. She sees a woman who gave everything, who believed in connection, who dared to feel. And though that faith was broken, it proves she was capable of real love, something not everyone can claim. Sandel might conclude, the moral worth of love does not lie in its duration, but in its honesty. And that honesty, even when painful, is what makes a woman free again. The ethics of attachment. In love, attachment begins as a quiet gratitude. Two lives meet, exchange warmth, and build a rhythm that feels eternal. But with time, that rhythm turns into expectation, and expectation slowly hardens into moral claim. A woman begins to believe that the man who once promised presence owes it to her. And when that presence fades, she feels betrayed, not just emotionally but ethically. Michael Sandel often warns about the danger of moral entitlements that arise from emotion. He reminds us that affection cannot be legislated, that desire cannot be forced into duty. In the moral marketplace of love, debt has no currency. Yet every woman who has ever loved deeply knows that the heart does not follow philosophical logic. When he pulls away, she demands an explanation, not out of control, but out of fairness. She wants the truth to make sense. But emotion does not obey reason. It only reveals it. And so the philosopher within her begins to speak, quietly, painfully. Perhaps love is not something he owes me. Perhaps it was always a gift that could end. That realization feels like injustice, but it is in fact liberation. Because once she accepts that love is voluntary, she begins to see her worth apart from it. Freedom, Sandel would say, is not the absence of connection. It is the moral clarity to choose it without fear. When love ends, the test of character is not how tightly she holds on, but how gracefully she lets go. In that surrender, a new dignity arises. It is the dignity of a woman who refuses to become a beggar of affection. She learns that letting go is not loss, it is an act of justice to herself. And justice in its truest sense is love without illusion, the silence between words. There is a stage in every heartbreak when words disappear. No more arguments, no more whys or please stay. Only silence and that long, heavy pause where the truth settles. Michael Sandel would say that silence in moral life is not emptiness. It is reflection. In that pause, the soul begins to deliberate. The mind replays moments not to cling, but to understand. Why did he change? Was it my fault? Could I have done more? But philosophy teaches that not all questions seek answers. Some questions exist to restore perspective. Silence becomes a courtroom where reason and emotion argue before the conscience. And in that quiet debate, she discovers something profound. He did not leave because she was unworthy. He left because he could not carry the moral weight of honesty any longer. When a man withdraws truthfully, he creates space for her awakening. When he disappears without explanation, he leaves behind confusion. And confusion over time becomes wisdom. For every sleepless night teaches restraint. Every unanswered message becomes a lesson in self-respect. Every tear waters a new root of independence. Sandel reminds us that moral growth begins when we examine the reasons behind pain rather than the people who caused it. So she begins to reinterpret silence, not as punishment but as passage. It is the bridge from dependence to discernment. The woman who once feared those words now begins to thank them, because they forced her to stop searching for validation and start searching for virtue. Virtue not in the moralistic sense, but in the quiet strength to act rightly even when wronged. To wish peace, not revenge. To forgive not because he deserves it, but because her soul deserves rest. In the stillness of solitude, she learns that silence, too, speaks, and sometimes it tells the truth better than any voice ever could. The reconstruction of self-healing is rarely loud. It begins in small acts. Getting up, breathing, choosing not to check the phone, making coffee, watching sunlight touch the same walls that once witnessed her despair. This ordinary courage is the most philosophical of all human acts. To live again without requiring an explanation. Sandel's moral vision teaches that community and meaning are rebuilt through shared practices, through rediscovering purpose beyond private loss. So she starts to rebuild herself not by forgetting him, but by remembering her own capacities, her empathy, her intelligence, her laughter that existed long before his presence. Every woman who has loved and lost must one day ask, who am I without the reflection of his eyes? That question is not tragedy, and it is rebirth. She realizes that love was never meant to complete her. It was meant to reveal her. And revelation is painful only because it is truthful. The moral task now is not to find another man, but to rediscover moral balance, the equilibrium between heart and reason. She begins to see love not as destiny, but as dialogue, a conversation between two freedoms that must continually choose each other. And if that choice ends, it does not mean failure. It means completion. Stoic philosophy whispers through her new awareness. Focus on what is within your control, your thoughts, your responses, your integrity. She practices this not in grand speeches, but in simple silence. She forgives without announcing it. She hopes without expecting it. She learns to love again. Not quickly, but consciously. Michael Sandel often closes his lectures by asking, What kind of life is truly worth living? For her, the answer now is clear. A life guided by truth, not illusion. A heart open enough to love, but wise enough to let go when love becomes unjust to herself. A spirit brave enough to face the words she once feared, and find meaning beyond them. Because in the end, those words, "I don't feel the same anymore," no longer echo as endings. They echo as beginnings, the beginning of moral independence, the rebirth of dignity, the quiet return to self-respect that no heartbreak can erase. And in that still, luminous awareness, she becomes the very embodiment of what philosophy was always meant to create. Not certainty, not perfection, but understanding. The moral weight of love when it begins feels infinite. Its promises are whispered as if time itself will obey them. Two people believe they have escaped the ordinary boundaries of the world, but eventually every love must face its own test of morality. The question not of how much we love, but how rightly. Michael Sandel reminds us that justice is not merely a set of rules. It is a way of honoring what deserves respect. And in love, the person before us is never property, never possession, never a project to complete. They are a moral being with their own interior world, their own freedom to feel, to change, to leave. When this truth is forgotten, affection turns into control. When remembered, love becomes ethical. Every woman who fears those words, "I don't feel the same anymore," is, in that fear, acknowledging a sacred truth, that love cannot be commanded. Her pain arises not from weakness, but from a profound respect for what love ought to be. She fears not the man's honesty, but the loss of moral reciprocity, that silent agreement that both hearts will treat each other with care. When that moral balance collapses, she stands before a difficult question. Can I still act with grace when he no longer acts with love? The Stoics would answer yes, because virtue does not depend on circumstance. Sandel would agree. Our worth is not measured by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens. She begins to understand that integrity is the last form of power left when everything else is taken. To choose honesty over resentment, to choose composure over chaos, to choose truth over fantasy. It is here that philosophy ceases to be theory and becomes survival. Her mind debates with her heart. Her reason consoles her emotion, and slowly the inner trial reaches its verdict. She is not broken. She is being refined. The moral weight of love is not carried by the one who leaves, but by the one who remains kind in the aftermath. Because love at its highest form was never about winning or losing. It was about living truthfully. The dignity of letting go. There comes a moment when she stops checking the door, when his memory no longer stings but simply exists, like a book she has read and understood. In that quiet acceptance, she reaches the summit of her emotional journey, the dignity of letting go. Sandel would say that moral maturity is the ability to see value even in disappointment. For the woman who once trembled at those feared words, the lesson has unfolded completely. She now understands that love is not a guarantee of permanence, but an invitation to growth. Every heartbreak is a moral classroom. Every loss a hidden professor. She begins to see how much strength it takes to love again, not recklessly but wisely. Her new affection, when it comes, will not be desperate or naive. It will be deliberate, principled, calm. She will no longer confuse attention with affection, possession with devotion, silence with peace. The philosopher in her now speaks with quiet authority. What I feared was not his words, but my own emptiness without them. And now I see it, I was never empty. I was waiting to know myself. Letting go becomes a moral act, an assertion that her happiness is not hostage to another's choices. Forgiveness becomes a declaration of freedom, not approval. She no longer needs closure, because understanding has taken its place. She no longer seeks justice from him because she has found justice within herself. And in that stillness she discovers something extraordinary: gratitude. Gratitude that she loved deeply enough to hurt, honestly enough to grow, and courageously enough to release. Her story is no longer a tragedy but a transformation. The words beyond fear. Every woman fears hearing those words from a man until she realizes that the words themselves were never the end. They were the beginning of consciousness. They forced her to question, to suffer, to awaken. And awakening, though painful, is the essence of wisdom. Michael Sandel often closes his reflections by asking, "What kind of life deserves our admiration?" The answer is simple yet profound. A life guided by truth, humility, and courage. A life where love is chosen freely, not clung to fearfully. A life where loss is not an insult but a teacher. So to every woman who has ever heard those words and felt her heart collapse, remember this: you have already done the hardest part. You have faced truth without running. You have endured the collapse of illusion and still stood upright. That is moral strength. That is philosophical grace. You feared the words because they ended a dream, but in ending the dream, they began your reality. And reality, however uncertain, however imperfect, is where freedom begins. The man may leave. The story may end. But the woman who has learned from it walks forward with quiet power. She no longer fears words. She listens for truth. She no longer chases permanence. She cultivates peace. And one day when she hears those words again, whether from another's mouth or her own memory, she will not break. She will simply nod, smile faintly, and say, "I understand." Because understanding is the final victory of the soul, the moment when philosophy and life become one.